There are moments in life when you think you've already lived through the worst, when you believe age has shown you everything it possibly can. But nothing prepares you for a different kind of pain, the kind that doesn't attack your body, but comes from someone who should have protected you. I never imagined that the most vulnerable moment of my life would become the perfect opportunity for my own daughter to take advantage of me. It didn't happen when I was strong or standing on my own 2 feet. It happened when I was lying in a hospital bed, unable to lift my head, unable to think clearly, barely holding on. My name is Helen, and I've built a quiet, simple life for myself. I'm 68, still fairly active, and always tried to stay independent. I enjoyed my morning walks, my small garden, my Sunday routine. I paid my bills on time, kept track of my accounts, and tried to avoid becoming a burden to anyone. I raised 2 children, Michael and Sarah, and loved them both the best I could. Michael stayed close, helping when needed, checking in on me, making sure I had what I required. Sarah lived farther away, busy with her work in finance, constantly rushing from one thing to another. With time, her calls became shorter, her visits less frequent, and I learned not to expect much. A few months before my hospitalization, I began to feel a heaviness that didn't go away. It wasn't the ordinary tiredness that comes with age. It felt deeper, more unsettling. My chest tightened after simple chores, and even pouring tea in the morning made my hands tremble slightly. I told myself it was nothing, just another sign of getting older, something to ignore until it passed. But one morning, while reaching for a cup, a sharp pain shot across my chest and down my arm. The kitchen spun, my vision blurred, and my legs gave out from under me. The only thing I remember after that is the sound of something crashing to the floor and the cold feeling of tile against my skin. I woke up later in a hospital room surrounded by machines and soft voices. A nurse explained that I'd had a cardiac episode and needed monitoring. Everything felt distant, muffled, like I was underwater. My limbs were heavy, my breathing shallow, and every movement drained what little strength I had left. I felt small, weak, and frightened in a way I hadn't since childhood. Hours passed before the door opened again, and Sarah stepped inside. I hadn't expected her to show up, not after so many months of near silence, but there she was, hurried, polished, and strangely restless. She hovered at my bedside, checking her phone, adjusting her bag, and acting more like she was waiting for something than visiting a sick parent. Over the next 2 days, she appeared more often than she had in the last year. On the surface, it seemed like concern, but something in her behavior didn't match the softness her words implied. Her presence felt rehearsed, her movements overly controlled, her eyes drifting constantly toward the structured work bag she carried with her. I tried to push away the uneasy feeling. I convinced myself I was imagining things, that my weakness made everything seem more dramatic than it was. I told myself that any mother would be grateful her daughter came at a time like this. But deep down, a quiet alarm had begun to ring. On the third evening, when my energy was at its lowest and the room felt dimmer than usual, Sarah walked in again. Her bag was halfway unzipped, and inside it I saw a stack of papers. The thick, formal kind, with banking logos and coloured tabs sticking out. She moved quickly and efficiently, arranging the documents on the small table beside my bed, aligning pages, checking marks, preparing them with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. My body sank into the mattress, too weak to shift, too exhausted to sit up. My thoughts were slow, foggy, unable to keep pace with what was unfolding. The papers were neatly organized, with certain sections highlighted and sticky notes marking specific places. Even from a distance, something about them felt heavy, official, far too complex for someone in my condition to understand. My chest tightened, not from the heart episode this time, but from a quiet, growing fear that I couldn't quite name yet. I sensed a shift in the atmosphere, something cold, calculated, and deeply wrong. I lay there, watching her hands move across the papers, and the uneasiness grew. The timing, the sudden attention, the stack of documents prepared in advance, the way she avoided my eyes while working, it all formed a picture I didn't want to believe. I felt myself drifting in and out of clarity, my mind struggling to stay alert, trying desperately to understand what was happening around me while my body refused to cooperate. And somewhere in that haze, the truth began to take shape, inch by inch, the way a shadow becomes recognizable only after it has grown large enough to touch you. As I watched Sarah shuffle those papers around, something inside me finally started to push through the fog. It was a slow, heavy realization, the kind that takes its time to settle because the heart doesn't want to accept it. I had always believed that even if Sarah and I grew apart, even if she became busy with her own life, she would never deliberately hurt me. But there, in that dim hospital room, I began to understand that her sudden concern wasn't concern at all. It was strategy. My hands trembled slightly as I tried to lift my head to get a better look at the documents, but my body refused to cooperate. The medication made everything feel distant, and I couldn't focus long enough to read a single line. All I saw were thick paragraphs, official stamps, and signatures, some of them looking eerily familiar, as if I had written them, yet I had no memory of doing so. That thought alone sent a cold wave through me. The room felt smaller, the walls closer. My breathing changed, shallow and uneven, as though my body was trying to warn me before my mind could catch up. Sarah's movements were too calm for someone supposedly helping a sick parent. She kept glancing at me not with concern, but with calculation, as if she was checking how much time she had left before I drifted into another wave of exhaustion. I wanted to ask her what she was doing, why she was in such a rush, why she was handling those papers with the confidence of someone who already knew the outcome. But I couldn't form words. Even thinking felt like trying to swim through thick mud. All I could do was watch. Eventually, she stepped aside to make a phone call, turning away from me but keeping her voice low. I couldn't make out the individual words, but there was something sharp and controlled in her tone. It wasn't the voice of a worried daughter. It was the voice of someone managing a process, someone working through a list of steps. I listened to the rhythm of her speech, the clipped way she emphasized certain things, and the uneasy feeling in my stomach grew heavier. When she ended the call, she set her phone down with a sense of finality, like a box checked off on her mental list. She leaned over the papers again and flipped through them with precision. From the corner of my eye, I noticed one page with large, bold text across the top. The letters weren't entirely clear, but I recognized enough to understand what kind of document it was. It wasn't something a person should be signing while barely conscious in a hospital bed, and certainly not something a daughter should be placing in front of a mother whose hands couldn't stop shaking. It all became painfully clear. She wasn't helping me. She was arranging something for herself. My heart pounded harder than it had since the episode that brought me there. Not physically painful this time, but emotionally sharp, like a betrayal slicing clean through whatever trust remained between us. I tried to shift my weight, to sit up, but my body was too weak. I felt trapped, like I was sinking deeper into the mattress with every breath. Sarah finally lifted her head and looked at me. For a moment, I hoped to see even a flicker of hesitation, some sign of guilt, something human that showed she knew she was crossing a line. But her expression was unreadable, polished, detached. the kind of look you see from someone who has convinced themselves that the end justifies the means. The hours that followed were a blur. Nurses came and went, checking my vitals, adjusting machines, asking questions I tried and failed to answer fully. Sarah stayed in the room longer than necessary, only stepping outside occasionally to make more calls. Each time she returned, she picked up those papers again, as if the work could not wait. The urgency in her movements made sense only later, when I understood exactly what she had been trying to accomplish. I didn't sleep much that night. My body desperately needed rest, but my mind refused to shut down. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the highlighted sections, the tabs, the familiar signature I didn't remember writing. I kept wondering how many decisions she had made for me while I drifted in and out of consciousness, how many signatures she had guided my hand through, how many things I had unknowingly agreed to. Morning came, but it didn't bring clarity. It only brought more questions. A social worker entered my room after breakfast. She was polite, warm, and spoke slowly, as if choosing her words carefully. She asked whether I had someone handling my finances during my recovery, whether I had recently updated any legal documents, whether I felt safe. Safe. That word lingered in the air between us, heavy and uncomfortable. I wanted to answer honestly, but fear tightened around my throat like an invisible band. What if Sarah had already set something in motion? What if she had somehow gained control of things I didn't even know about? What if speaking up made everything worse? The social worker looked at me with kind, patient eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. I simply nodded along, hoping the conversation would end quickly. Later that day, Michael arrived. His presence was like a breath of fresh air after days of tension. He looked genuinely worried, genuinely present. The difference between his concern and Sarah's rehearsed performance hit me harder than I expected. Just seeing him there made something inside me unravel. For the first time since the heart episode, I felt like I might actually be safe. But the moment he noticed the stack of papers on the table, everything changed. His eyes narrowed in confusion, and he asked a quiet question I couldn't fully respond to. The look on his face told me he already had a sense of what might be happening, and the realization made my stomach twist. He picked up the top page and scanned it. His entire expression shifted, from confusion to disbelief, to anger so sudden he had to turn away for a moment to steady himself. I couldn't see the details from my bed, but his reaction told me everything. Whatever Sarah had been preparing wasn't small. It wasn't harmless. It was something that could change the course of my life without my consent. When the truth finally came out, it was worse than anything I had imagined. Horror show. Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't panic or run into the hallway looking for someone to blame. Instead, he stood very still, holding the papers like they were something toxic, something that could burn straight through his hands if he gripped them any tighter. I watched him from the bed, weak and terrified, wishing I could pretend it was all some horrible misunderstanding. But the truth hung heavily in the room, undeniable and sharp. He set the papers down and came closer, lowering himself to my eye level. His expression had softened, not with pity, but with a kind of painful understanding. It was clear he didn't want to upset me further, but also couldn't hide what he had seen. The shock in his eyes told me that whatever Sarah had been planning wasn't something small or temporary. It was something that could have changed my life completely while I lay there helpless. After a moment, he stood, walked out of the room, and called a nurse. His voice stayed controlled, but I could sense the urgency underneath. A few minutes later, a doctor arrived, followed by a hospital administrator. They spoke quietly with Michael outside my door. I tried to follow the conversation through the glass, but I couldn't hear anything. The only thing I saw clearly was the expression on Michael's face. Focused, determined, protective in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. When the door finally opened again, the hospital staff came inside. They checked the papers, asked me a few gentle questions, and looked at the stack with the same concern Michael had shown. Whatever was written, there clearly didn't belong in a patient's room, let alone beside someone recovering from a cardiac episode. I learned later that Sarah had tried to establish full control over my finances through documents that would grant her authority over my accounts, my home, and even medical decisions. Some of the pages contained signatures that resembled mine, but weren't placed in my usual way. Others were filled in using information I had never given her. There were forms allowing access to my bank accounts, drafts of changes to my will, and a request for long-term decision-making authority. She had even begun the early stages of paperwork for assisted living, as if she planned to move me somewhere the moment she had control. The hospital immediately halted everything and contacted the legal department. They questioned how the papers had entered my room, who had brought them, and whether I had knowingly signed anything. My answers were shaky, uncertain, but they were honest. I didn't remember signing anything. I didn't remember holding a pen. I didn't remember giving permission for any of it. A social worker sat with me for nearly an hour, explaining that it wasn't uncommon for vulnerable patients to be targeted in situations like mine. Elder financial abuse, she called it. The words hit me like a physical blow. I had heard about it on the news, but never once imagined it could happen inside my own family, let alone from my own daughter. The more I learned about the situation, the more hollow I felt. It wasn't only the betrayal, it was the realization that Sarah had waited for the perfect moment. She hadn't tried this when I was healthy and alert. She waited until my body was failing, until medication slowed my thoughts, until I couldn't even sit up without help. She chose the moment when I was weakest because she knew I couldn't fight back. Later that evening, Michael returned and stayed by my bedside. He didn't bring up the papers directly, but the weight of everything hung between us. He kept checking the hallway, as if expecting Sarah to return, but she never did. She had left the hospital earlier in the day, before anyone realized what was happening. Whether she had sensed that Michael was onto her, or simply didn't want to face confrontation, I never found out. The next morning, the hospital initiated a temporary safeguard to protect me from any unauthorized decisions. Michael voluntarily stepped in as my emergency contact and temporary medical proxy, making it clear he wanted nothing to do with my finances and only wanted to ensure I was safe. His steadiness gave me a kind of comfort I desperately needed. For the first time since the heart episode, I felt like I had someone truly on my side. When I was discharged a few days later, the world felt different. My home didn't feel as warm or familiar as before. Every piece of mail, every envelope, every small detail made me wonder what else Sarah might have touched without my knowledge. I checked my bank accounts, my insurance, my documents, anything that could have been altered. Michael helped me contact an attorney who specialized in elder protection. It wasn't to punish Sarah at first. It was simply to secure my life, to make sure nothing could be changed without my say. But the deeper we looked, the more unsettling things became. There were attempts to access my online banking, requests for account information, inquiries made in my name to a real estate company about the value of my home. All of it within the same short period I had been in the hospital. It became painfully clear that Sarah hadn't acted impulsively. She had planned it. For weeks after, I kept trying to understand how my own daughter could do something like this. I replayed old memories, tried to find the moment where things shifted between us. Maybe she had grown resentful over the years. Maybe she had convinced herself that her financial success meant she deserved more. Maybe she felt entitled after convincing herself she was the child who knew better, who could handle things more efficiently. Or maybe, deep down, she simply cared more about what I owned than about me. The thought was impossible to swallow. When Sarah finally called me weeks later, I couldn't answer. Not because I wanted revenge, but because the wound was still raw, and I knew every word I heard from her would reopen it. I needed space. I needed safety. And more than anything, I needed time to grieve a living person, the daughter I thought I had, the relationship I believed still existed. Recovery wasn't just physical after that. It was emotional. Each day brought a different mix of sadness, anger, and quiet disbelief. I had lost so much trust that even the smallest decisions felt heavy. But slowly, with Michael's support and the help of professionals, I rebuilt the walls around my life. Documents were updated, protections put in place, accounts secured, and every remaining vulnerability sealed. I never imagined that surviving a heart episode would be the easier part of my ordeal. The truly painful wound wasn't in my chest. It was in the place inside a mother that hopes her children will always love her more than they love anything she could ever leave behind. That wound takes longer to heal. But I did heal, piece by piece. Enough to tell this story. Enough to warn others to protect themselves. Enough to move forward with my life, even if one of my children chose to step out of it in the coldest way imaginable. And enough to learn that sometimes the deepest betrayal comes not from strangers, but from the people you once trusted more than anyone in the world.